Between July and October of last year, the British Conservative Party considered whether to reform the 2004 Gender Recognition Act so that any person could change his legal gender simply by filling out a form. Yes, the Conservative Party did this. Women, especially women on the left, protested that move, saying it undermines sex-based rights and protections for women in shelters, prisons, education and beyond. Now in the USA, the Democrats are hoping to advance the Equality Act, which would interpret sex to mean gender identity in federal law. This comes with the same concerns, and women again are leading the resistance. Here to talk about these problems, I'm joined in National Review studio with Posey Parker, real name Kelly J. Keane-Minshall.
Good morning.
Dr. Julia Long, activist and researcher.
Good morning.
And Venice Allan, who was kicked out of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party for alleged transphobia and now organises women's events around the UK and beyond.
Hi.
Welcome, ladies. So before we get into why legally enshrined gender identity is a total disaster for women and children, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. We are in National Review's headquarters. National Review being a conservative magazine. A magazine which is very against abortion. Many of our writers believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. We have probably very different views on taxes, foreign policy, all the rest of it. Why are you here today to talk to us?
Because the invitations from the left have never been forthcoming. So it's either talk to you and allow some people to learn about what is going on in this country, or don't talk to anybody.
And you've had some criticism, haven't you, from, I suppose, collaborating with conservative outlets thus far?
For me, I think it's much more important what I say and what we say rather actually than where we say it.
So I wonder if, I know that you guys have been, you ladies rather, have been criticised as being TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, and you've been called much worse than that, I'm sure. Why is it that lots of people are willing to believe that the trans activists hold the monopoly on compassion?
I have no idea, but I saw a picture of Jazz Jennings yesterday taken from his TV show, and it shows a very young...
Just a bit of context there. Jazz Jennings is a male child who has been raised, socialised as a girl and medically transitioned as a girl for a TV show here in the US called I Am Jazz, and the climax of that is his operation to have his penis surgically removed and a vagina constructed. Anyway.
So to give that further context, Jazz, his mother started putting him on YouTube very, very young. I've seen a video of that child way before he's 4. And there's a big song and dance about him having a sparkly swimming costume and being allowed to have his hair up. Now, I remember that, and everybody was celebrating. I have no words to describe the loathing I feel for his mother and the exploitative nature in which she sold his pain and suffering to TV companies. I feel a deep-rooted anger for that woman. And then that child grows, he has puberty blockers, which are irreversible. There is no evidence at all anywhere that exists that says they are reversible. So not when used in this context, not when used for these children for these years.
Yeah,
so it's a lie.
There's the puberty blocking drugs, but the problem is now, especially, is that the vast majority of the children on the puberty blocking drugs, if not all of them, are now going on to the cross-sex hormones where that's it, that's kind of game over.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so he has his penis finally inverted using some stomach lining to create a cavity because he hasn't got enough genetic material. And he has had complications, and now he has to dilate, which means for hours he has to stretch the wound. Now, I just can't picture a 2019 that looks like one where we are celebrating that journey for that child.
I think, to answer your question as well, like trans activists have constructed this idea of transphobia. So when somebody who hasn't really thought about transgenderism says, oh, that woman's transphobic, it says, oh, that sounds like homophobic or, Islamophobic. It's all, it's a ridiculous thing, because if there's no such thing as transgender, really, if it's just, then what is transphobia? It's just disagreeing with an ideology, but that's painted as if it's a kind of hatred of another human being or a class of humans.
Yeah, this is a really important point, and I know we've all discussed this at great length, is the appropriation of language and the manipulation of language in order to justify the unjustifiable. Julia, I know we had a conversation where I said, hypothetically, or in fact in practice, why shouldn't I use somebody's preferred pronouns as a courtesy? And you were quite emphatic about this. I almost felt like I was getting a telling off.
No.
You probably were. But yeah, if you want to, you can do it as stridently as you did last time, but explain how you feel about that and why.
Yeah, it's interesting because even, in the UK, there has been quite a debate about the whole issue of transgenderism and particularly about the GRA reform. But even there's a lot of voices, even those who are critical of the phenomenon and critical of, and trying to raise awareness about what the implications are for women and children. There still seems to be a really misguided notion that we have to be courteous and we have to call men she if that's what they prefer. That is the heart of what is damaging, because the heart of what is damaging, and this is a very, very male-dominated movement. If we look at the history, Sheila Jeffries wrote an excellent book which does a very good job of explaining the history of transgenderism, which demonstrates that it's a thoroughly male-dominated movement. And so if we look at that, we can see that men who, for various reasons, usually to do with fetishizing femininity, and then demanding, as part of that we all pretend that they're women. If they then have invented this category of being either, it used to be transsexual and now it's transgender or trans woman, or increasingly dropping the trans altogether. So they are demanding that we perceive them as female, as women.
So it's not just a courtesy.
So if we say she, we are colluding with that pretense. And obviously, all of the harms of this whole movement, the heart of it is men claiming to be women. It's really vital that we name men as men, because that then reveals the behaviour, the entitled behaviour and the aggressively misogynistic behaviour that's at the heart of it. And as long as we say she, we are masking that. And that is the thing that has to be unmasked.
This is a nice segue into the most controversial moment of your trip, when you confronted the powerful lobbyist and male, Sarah McBride, who works for the Human Rights Campaign, and you guys took a video of you trying to ask him some questions about why it is he's advancing the Equality Act, given all the things we've discussed to do with child welfare and women's spaces. So this was very controversial because it was perceived to be harassment and ambushing. I think also on Twitter people were calling it an attack. Ladies, what do you make of this?
Right. So we happen to be at the Senate building. We see some fuss with some cameras, and then we notice Sarah McBride.
So this was not planned?
Oh, my goodness, no. We just happened to be there. It was fortuitous, shall we say. And then we go to walk off, and Sarah McBride had gone into a meeting room that had, like, open door. The meeting had finished. The parents had all left. And I just said to Julia, I think we should go and ask him some questions. And Julia was very eager, and we both just returned. And we just walked in the room with the camera on, because the good thing about today's sort of Facebook Live and all those things is you can instantly make people accountable, and they can't lie about what you said, even if retrospectively everyone decides asking a man in a position of power who wishes to eradicate the rights of women in law, if you ask him why he hates lesbians or why he doesn't care about women or young girls having double mastectomies, if you can ask him and show that he really doesn't care and won't even engage in a discussion, then I think you reveal, you don't really need to say too much more about him. You reveal him as he is.
Yes, Gillian.
And I was extremely pleased that Kelly J made that suggestion. I was very enthusiastic, and because I think it's absolutely crucial that someone in the position of this Mr. McBride, who is a very influential lobbyist who represents the so-called Human Rights Campaign, which is an organisation which has thoroughly betrayed lesbians. It calls itself an LGBTQ, all the ABCs, alphabet soup thing. It calls itself an LGBTQ organisation, but it has totally betrayed lesbians under this fiction that men can be lesbians, which has introduced a rape culture into lesbian communities where you have men demanding that lesbians have sex with them, form relationships with them, etc., and is also responsible for the destruction of the bodies of young lesbians. So it's really crucial that these men are challenged, and I think the response to that by saying that, we were impolite, or we've even been accused of criminal violence by walking into that room. And this is by feminists who call themselves so-called gender critical, that we were accused of these things by walking into that room and asking Mr. McBride a series of extremely pertinent questions, given that he'd just been in the Congress buildings championing the Equality Act, which will decimate whatever remains now of women's rights and lesbians' rights in particular.
I think this is testament to the power of spin, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, so when I look at this, I see a man presenting as a woman, but I see a man, a powerful man. He's certainly, no offence, ladies, physically a lot stronger than you two are.
Yeah.
Sitting down after having given this conference, you two come in. I mean, you were not particularly polite. I think at one point, Posey, you said, shame on you. And you're asking him these questions and he refuses to answer. Mm. And even if I didn't know what it was about, that is what I would say. Mm. But now we're in a situation where lots of people are watching that clip, where they're reading about the clip, and they see a vulnerable woman being berated by two powerful women. And it's just
not so gender critical after all.
Yeah, but it is really, it's extraordinary how... I mean, when you unpack all of this stuff, there's not a whole lot of sense, and yet it's amazing how it's been spun to represent something else.
I think if it's because people have kind of imbibed this misperception that he is a woman, and that's why it's so crucial that we name him as a man, because if, obviously there's been the Me Too movement. If that was a woman challenging one of the perpetrators who's been revealed through the Me Too movement, like the Harvey Weinsteins, the R. Kellys, these perpetrators, if that was a woman or even a group of women doing the same thing and challenging them and being seen to be totally ignored, I think we would be the heroes of the internet now. But instead, because he is perceived as a woman, even feminists, women who purportedly are on the same side of us, have denounced us, really denounced us for doing that, and colluded with this sort of reversal of the trans lobby, that we are somehow the oppressors and this man is a victim.
Yeah, Venice.
I think one of the things about that, and the actual women who are quite well-known journalists and academics who are supposed to be on our side, is that they've chosen a strategy. And their strategy is let's keep the law as it is. Let's keep the Gender Recognition Act as it is. There is such a thing as real transsexuals, but we don't want predatory men abusing gender laws.
So it's a compromise. It's an attempted compromise.
But it's a completely nonsensical compromise, which I don't think they've actually thought it out. And I think when we challenge them on those views, they just get very defensive and take it as a personal attack. And everyone talks about infighting. And that's back to what we were talking about, us being here at National Review or being at the Heritage Foundation event, and what Julia said about it's much more important what you say than who you say it to or where you say it. And this discussion has to happen. is it okay to say she to a man who who said that he's not going to demonise us and he's prepared to have this conversation? Oh, great, so let's call him she. Let's recognise him on some level as a woman. No, and that's what we actually have to have this discussion. It's not a personal discussion. It's the discussion.
Yeah, and so your campaign at Standing for Women involves just the dictionary definition of the woman, adult, human, female. So Venice, tell us about the Congresswoman's door. You decided to leave a sticker on, the sticker that says adult, human, female.
Well, yeah, I was tasked with going around with our Women Stand Up folders and leaving them with senators and other politicians' offices. And so I made a beeline for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office. And it seemed to me, out of all the offices that I saw, she actually had a sort of sticker thing outside her door. I think when she first got in there, she actually put a trans rights flag outside her door, didn't she? Which got
well, she's incredibly vain, you see, so she loves all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, her door was completely unlike any other door that I saw. So I saw an opportunity with all these messages of "You're so great." I just stuck a very neutral sticker, which is the Standing for Women's woman, adult, human, female, which shouldn't be that controversial, but it has become so.
So some people might say, what are these British females... Some people might say, what are these British feminists doing over here in America, sticking their big beak in? Well, it's interesting because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, got involved in supporting a very, very controversial British charity, Mermaids. And Mermaids, for those of you who aren't familiar with their work, they promote sex change for gender-confused children. I think that's about as succinct a summary as you can get. And the chief executive of that organisation is a woman called Susie Green. Susie Green took her 16-year-old son to Thailand for a now illegal sex change operation and has made it her life's mission to convince other parents that this is the route they should go down. In fact, it is the only route in which they should go down. And Posey, I know you have had a run-in or two with Susie Green. I was wondering if you might tell us a little bit about that, and especially in the context of hate speech laws, because I know our American listeners will be interested in that.
Well, your American listeners should be very happy about your First Amendment right. In the UK, last year, February it was, I spent 40 minutes in a police station being interviewed under caution at the behest of Susie Green. So she'd reported me for 6 tweets in which I'd mentioned the fact that she castrated her child. And
particularly, it's more than a castration because it's the removal of the entire penis, but that's just a technicality.
Well, it is. It's the penis is inverted, but the castration part. So I use the word castration because I feel it's a good word. People know what castration means. Penis inversion, it's not so quick. So I went to the police station, had a 40-minute interview under caution. Then I had to, and the charges they were looking at were a list. So it's malicious communications, which is the fact that I'd said it over Twitter, so it's an electronic communication. You need harassment or threatening behaviour in order to get that. Nuisance order, public order, and hate speech and conspiracy. So all of these things are what the police were trying to create some sort of case in order to take me to court.
What was it like being interrogated? Did they show up at your house? Did they? How did it?
No, they text me first because that's how you catch criminals. So they text me and I just ignored it because I thought that no, the police don't phone and say we need to speak to you about an important matter. I assumed it was a scam. And then this northern chap phones me and he's so friendly and lovely. That the next time that I speak to him after my solicitors got disclosure, so your solicitor then asks for evidence to see what they're going to talk to you about. And he phoned me the second time and he said, oh, well, Mrs. Keane-Minshall, which is my real name, well, Mrs. Keane-Minshall, if you don't come to the interview, you'll be wanted. And I was he's such a nice guy. I was like, oh, everybody wants me, thinking I was hilarious. And I said, actually, what does that mean? And he said, well, it means if you try to leave the country, we'll arrest you. if you get pulled over and you're speeding, we'll arrest you. And then he said a couple of things that I really don't remember. And he said, and if that takes too long, we'll come and arrest you at your house. And then you'll sit in the cells and wait for me to come and interview you, which could take a very long time because of the geographical distance between him and my force. But they came and spent the night in my area, in a hotel, to interview me about 6 tweets, which basically criticised a woman who took her son to Thailand and had him castrated, amongst other things.
It's interesting, the contrast here. I had a phone call yesterday from a journalist in the UK who was telling me about what she considers to be harassment online, and somebody set up a website devoted to really disgusting sexual smears, among other things, and she's been doxxed, which obviously means her personal information and where her children go to school have been released online for being quote-unquote transphobic. This is why this has happened, and she has gone to the police and been given short shrift. And it was interesting, I saw on Twitter that Mermaids had their Christmas party at, was it West Yorkshire?
West Midlands.
Or West Midlands, please. And I really I kind of like watch it from this side of the Atlantic in America, and I just think, is this really as bad as it looks? Is it?
Yes. I was doxxed. So there's a website with pictures of my kids, where they go to school, what my husband looks like, what my house looks like, how much I've paid for my house. And when the police came round, he was both dismissive and arrogant, but also knew a lot about me, which was weird. And he said, well, it's not a crime because there's no direct contact. And yet the latest thing I've been at the police station for regarding Susie Green is 2 comments on a YouTube video I make about her.
I mean, also, it's worth noting at this point that in hate legislation, hate crime, hate incident legislation in the UK, it's race, disability, sexuality, religion, and transgender identity. Sex doesn't, although we're protected in the Equality Act as women, in hate crime legislation, there is no category.
It's funny as well because obviously, so I don't agree with hate crime legislation at all.
Nor do I.
Neither do I.
But it's just funny how there's a few of these categories which are in direct contradiction with one another. So, for example, religion. I think it's fair to say that it's pretty mainstream if you're a Muslim to think homosexuality is wrong, and you might even feel the need to be outspoken about that. How does that go down with sexual orientation being a protected characteristic if what you're talking about is hate?
Yeah.
As opposed to an actual...
When there's no actual legal hierarchy to that hate legislation, but in reality there is.
Yes, there is, yeah, definitely. And I think because this has become such a fashionable cause as well, that's definitely part of it. Venice, I wondered if you could share the story of being in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and how you were ousted.
Well, I was a very strong supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, and I joined Momentum when it started at the beginning of 2016.
So Momentum's a grassroots organisation, is that right?
It's like the Jeremy Corbyn fan club. When he became leader...
what was it you liked about him?
I thought he was like a genuine person with socialist values and would be kind of a game changer, and I never imagined for a minute that the political group that I felt aligned with was so misogynistic. I just assumed that if you were a leftist, that means that you're anti-racist, anti-homophobia, anti-sexism. That's what I thought leftism was. So I was quite, active, trying to get him elected, with all the rest of Momentum. And then I found out about, it was actually, I'd been following this transgender argument, and I guess I did have kind of turfy views already, but I just thought it was very abstract and it never happened. Then what changed it for me was actually hearing Jeremy Corbyn in July of 2017 saying, I support Theresa May. It was at the Pink News Awards, LGBT blog site. It was at their award ceremony saying, I support Theresa May with the Gender Recognition Act, and he didn't make a mention of women's rights. And I thought, oh my goodness, like he just doesn't understand. He just doesn't know that there is a conflict between women's rights. So I'll just explain it, and I'll just have this conversation locally in my Momentum group, and then that will filter through to him. And that's just not what happened. So I tried to start an event. I tried to organise an event locally where we discussed it. Was totally told absolutely no way. And then one thing followed on from the other, and I suddenly became like this terrible person in Labour that they had to get rid of. And then in January 2018, I received a suspension from the Labour Party with immediate effect. I was no longer allowed to attend my branch meetings, all because I just said some things on Twitter, on Facebook, in the capacity of a normal member. I wasn't like a women's officer or any employee of the Labour Party, just for little memes saying trans women are men and making jokes, really. Like,
I think one of the things that's so striking about all of this is how absolutely humourless it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
no comedians talk about it either.
No, I know, and it's a gift to comedians because it's so absurd. It's like so patently absurd. But this comes back to what we're talking about with the spin. And the idea is that these people, trans-identifying people, are so fragile. They are so fragile that if you say anything to question or criticise their beliefs, beliefs which are, well, I think it's more like a cult, but I suppose like religious beliefs, you could say, then you're increasing their chance of suicide. I know. Which is just such a leap, logically.
There's the quote, isn't there? Who is it who said, men are afraid that women will laugh at them and men are afraid... No.
Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Yeah, and that really shows with this whole trans debate.
Yeah. Well, we're running on a bit, so I'll just wrap this up by asking you all... if you could tell me, from your time in America, I know you've been in DC and now in New York, what's been the highlight for you? What's been the most powerful, striking, memorable moment, and why? Julia, you want to kick off?
I've hardly even had time to process it. It's been a total blast from start to finish. I think what was really exciting to me, I loved working with the women in America, the feminists that we've been working with. This hasn't been a case of us coming over and imposing ourselves over here. It was very much a collaborative effort. That was such a joy. And I think sitting around, although it may not seem the most racy and exciting part of it, sitting around those tables in Congress and in the different houses and having those conversations and being so sort of well received and to start to see some connections being made, I felt that this was really helping to move on the political debate here. So that was my highlight.
I mean, I just follow on from what Julia said. I know that all these women have been working away on these issues for years, but I think that it's just seeing how us coming, or Posey actually making the decision that we're going to go over there, has seen how it's just given so many women, feminists, mothers of kids who think they're trans, so much hope and so much energy. And I just know that when we leave, all of this will carry on.
I thoroughly enjoyed walking around the Senate and talking to people in power and listening to panels and all of that. But I cannot begin to even say the impact those women's voices had on me. Those mothers talking about what's happened to their daughters. It will stay with me forever. And I guarantee to every one of them that I don't care what happens. I don't care how people try and characterise what we're doing as anything other than truly because these women need some help. So I will just continue to do this. It's just so profoundly upsetting what's happening in this country.
And I will add, not that I would ask myself a question, but I obviously I met you ladies in DC, and there was a moment we were out for drinks and our handsome male waiter came over. He's a psychology student. And it was just fun to see Posey one-on-one in action, being very sweet and engaging and asking him what he thought of transgenderism. Maybe we had a couple of glasses of Prosecco.
Maybe.
And of course he's a psychology student, he's a liberal, so he started to say the usual sound bites, and Posey said, "Oh really, do you think so?" And she started to ask more and more questions, including, "So would you date a trans woman? Do you see a trans woman as the same as women?" At which point he went bright red and said, "Oh, I suppose I'll have to think about this." And I think that for me was a really great moment, because ultimately you guys are going to get smeared, you are going to get attacked. Some people will believe the spin. And actually what's really important, I think, is just for ordinary people to just realise that one-on-one, just speak the truth. Just don't do it in an aggressive way, in a patronising way. Just speak the truth. State the obvious. You'll be amazed. Well, thanks so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Maddy.
Thank you, Maddy.
Maddy.
Get your hands